Hey, Coach Val.
What's going on, Dr. Tiff? Welcome to Tuesday.
The best day of the week, right?
That's right.
I love it. Thanks, everybody, for joining us again tonight. Go ahead and share this episode with the friends. Send them a text message. Click the share button if you're on Facebook Live, you're on YouTube. Share it with them so they can join the conversation because, again, this is a amazing episode. We're kind of doing an extension of what we've been talking about the past two episodes. If you missed part one and two of our latest topic, you want to go back and listen to those for sure. We talked about the podcast titled Sold a Story and the different issues that kids are having in reading in schools, and we revealed why. The podcast really did just put it out there plain and simple. The type of curriculum that is being used in schools is not effective. It's teaching them to effectively guess and not use phonics or decoding for reading. And the switch has been to the science of reading, which I'll tell you, I got a book. Someone recommended a book to me, and it's called The Science of Reading. I like to read. I wouldn't say I'm an avid reader, but I like to read. I opened this book up, and the level of research and brainwave photos and all that in the book, I think I got through like 10 pages, and I was like, oof, this is heavy stuff. I don't know if I'm ready for this yet. What
See,
about you? Have
I
you
need
heard
that
of
book. I
Science of
I had
Reading?
never heard of it. You guys know if you don't, my background is math, 18 and a half years, straight math, except for one tiny small semester. I was forced to do social studies. And I would never do it again if I have the option. But I will say, to some people's surprise, I like have a interest in ELA and reading. I always have. So when I decided between the two, like ELA or math, I picked math because I didn't want to read papers. Judge me if you want to. It's okay. But no, so this science of reading thing is very, very new to me. I'm also not in elementary school. So at my level, I don't really encounter like having to break down how to read a word or a string of words. So it's very new to me, but at the same time, it was very intriguing. Again, go back to the earlier episodes. I have a personal story related to this with my own children. Tiffany, I would love to read that book. It would just feed the nerdy, sciencey part of me. Like I would get all into the brain pictures and scans and everything. I'm gonna have to do that.
Consider it yours, my friend. I will put it in the mail to you
Thank you.
because, as you know, with kids, when they're reading something that they're not super interested in or something that's maybe way above their level, the amount of retention of information is minimal. So I already knew that. But you're in luck as viewers tonight because what Val and I maybe don't know the depths of the science of reading with our combined years in the education system, we know a lot of people, and we have a special guest with us tonight. We're going to welcome Ambria King on with us. Hello, hello.
Hi.
Hi.
Hey, thank you for having me.
Yeah, Ambria has really dove into the science of reading, has educated herself on it. So she's going to educate us on it tonight. So I want to start, Ambria, just share a little bit about your background and education with us and our viewers.
Yeah, happy to. I love that you said I've dove into the science of reading, and I feel like that's a wonderfully way to say that I am a nerd, which is true. But this is my 17th year in formal and informal education. I at my core, at my heart, am an early education advocate. I, you know, bleed early ed and its importance, which is probably why I love science of reading so much because I'm like, please let me talk about brain development before age 5. And it's great, when we're talking about this topic in particular. But I got my start in youth ministry, actually, which is a very, informal way to get into education, founded the children's church program at my home church, was teaching then at 13, 14. And it's just kind of blossomed into this career that spanned a variety of educational professional jobs, from infant toddler classrooms and preschool classrooms into the K-12 space, where I was a special educator. So I had combined grade, combined aged classrooms. So my students were a wide variety of ages. I taught all subjects, and also transitioned partially into administration in the special ed space, specifically working on like curriculum and assessment and evaluation. So it's kind of been a, wide journey in the past 17 years. And now I work a lot in like family and community engagement in the early education space, what that all looks like. And I'm also currently earning my doctoral degree in educational leadership. Thank you. And I'm studying Black families, like mediation of screen time for their young children. So what does that look like? What are those decisions, right? And like, how does that all play into their children's development? So it's a very broad topic, but very, very interesting.
Love it. Awesome. Well, you bring a wealth of knowledge to not only us, but our viewers as well. So knowing what we have talked about the Soul to Story podcast, can you briefly kind of talk about the science of reading, what that is and how it kind of differs from that cued reading approach that we talked about in previous episodes?
Yes. So I think a lot of times, especially in education, when we have a hot button phrase or thing, people automatically think that, oh, that's one thing. And what gets confusing about the science of reading is that it's not just one thing. It's not just this one set curriculum, but instead it's decades of research that we're really looking at, like you were mentioning in that book. What does our brain look like when we're trying to read? How does our brain function? Neuroscience was one of my favorite classes in all of my schooling. So I really found the science of reading like through my neuroscience studies and looking at how do we learn and what does that look like biologically? How do we learn? So yeah, science of reading, decades of research on how we read, how we learn to read. And then obviously, how does reading fit into this overall massive thing that is communication? Because it's just one tiny piece, right? In how we communicate and understand one another. But even in its tiny piece, it also has various tiny pieces that go into it as well. I like to think about reading kind of almost like a quilt. Like you have all of these little pieces that you patch together to make a block, but then you have to take all of those other blocks to stitch together to make a face. And it keeps building and building and building. So yes, science of reading really just looks at all of the pieces that we need to know, the skills we need to have that then are intertwined together so that we can actually read.
I love that. So really looking at not the piece in the classroom of what materials are put in front of the kid to teach them how to read, but what is going on in the brain when a child is learning to read, when they're in the act of reading.
Yes, exactly.
I love that. So how does that differ from what our traditional kind of approach to reading is in schools?
Yes. So I think, in the past 15, 20 years or so, we talk a lot about, you'll hear, parents, grandparents now talk about, oh, well, back in my day, we were doing hooked on phonics. And, kids are like, what in the world is that? I don't know that. And so we've kind of drifted away from those basic phonetic concepts. And science of reading is all about phonics and phonemic awareness and our ability to identify sounds and manipulate sounds and to look at a word that we are unfamiliar with and to break it down into sounds. The approaches that we've seen more recently are rather to say, I have a word that I don't know. Let me utilize the other words around it in the sentence. Let me utilize what I've comprehended from what I've read so far. Let me utilize the pictures that may be accompanying what I'm reading to infer what I think that word says, rather than to break it down and really learn how to read it. So, yeah, we're not really reading as much as we are inferring and guessing.
Yeah. And those are some high level skills, making inferences, comprehending. We're
Yeah.
talking about some high level language skills there. So when you have a kid who has challenges in those areas and then they're being taught to read using these traditional methods, they're going to struggle.
Right. Exactly.
Struggle. Yeah.
And struggle they do.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And that struggle compounds as they get older if it's not corrected fast enough. Like we're curious, Ambria, like what have you noticed in student progress, like between the various reading programs or curricula?
A lot of things. Definitely the as you mentioned, the lack of skill just compounds the further they go. And so you see students who, have that just basic inability to decode a word, to break it down. A lot of times parents would be like, oh, well, sound it out. But kids don't know how to sound it out. So I've seen that. I've also seen, in addition to all of these like inference-based curriculums when it comes to reading, we've also had these more like memorization-based curriculums. Sight words are a whole thing that's just, oh, you're going to see it and you're going to know it. And yes, that has its time and place within learning how to read. And there are words in the English language that are undecodable. We just have to know them. But memorization can only take you so far. And so then you get to be 15 and we start reading Shakespeare in class. And yeah, that's a whole thing in and of itself. But also, how can you not break down this word? I've also seen students who lack comprehension skills. So they can't tell you what they've read at all because they've just been trying to piece together what they think the words say and what they're supposed to say out loud when they're reading it to you. And their brain is using so much power to make all of those inferences that they can't then fully understand what they're reading and what's happening and what they're reading. And then in addition to that, we also have students who lack fluency skills. So they're spending so much time trying to piece together these things to understand what the words say that it's slowing down just their ability to read. So their reading speed is lower, their fluency is lower because they don't know the words as they see them. So our fluency just completely declines.
That's so interesting that you say that because I remember from the Sold a Story podcast that they were talking about how uncute, phonics learning is because you're like spending time sounding out the words and kids just want to read. They just want to get in there and read a book. And so that's why giving them a book, asking them to look at the pictures, gets them through the book faster and they're reading. And then that is what sparks this love of reading because they're actually getting through books versus if they have to sound out words, it's taking them so long to get through a page, even if it's just the one sentence like you might see in kindergarten, that it makes them not like reading.
Mm-hmm. And that's very true. And I think we put such a high emphasis on reading that it just creates this innate pressure on kids to be able to read. And there are lots of ways in which we could argue why that exists and where that comes from. But, then it, creates this perpetual cycle of, no, I have to know it and I have to know it now so that I can do it, so that I can move on, rather than, building resiliency in the learning. I've okay, I won't get on my like social emotional learning soapbox today, but also, the idea of like growth mindset. It's okay to fail. It's okay to not know it right now. We're working towards it. And look how much better you were today than you were a month ago. And so, yes, sometimes there is good in, bringing in things that we know that they're going to enjoy, utilizing characters that they're already familiar with, utilizing things that they can build from. That's just funds of knowledge at its basis. So taking that, but also recognizing that, well, those interests are going to change 5 years from now, 10 years from now, but that skill set that you never developed is still going to be lacking 5 years from now, 10 years from now.
Right, right. That is so true. What have you seen now in the classroom in reading lessons? How has the science of reading been incorporated now? As we've seen this shift from that cued reading, some school districts are just outright banning that method of reading and pulling in the science of reading, which I feel like, we talked about this last week, Val. These school districts aren't doing their own research.
Right.
They're relying on what the companies are telling them. So I think a lot of them feel like the science of reading is another type of curriculum, and that's not what it is.
Right.
So how are they incorporating the concepts with the science of reading into their reading lessons in schools now?
So I would say that they are and they are not. And I also want to give the caveat that, all of my K-12 formal education type work has been like intervention based, and 99% of intervention based instruction is aligned to the science of reading. So, that's a good portion of what I've seen myself. But, we are seeing, introductions of phonemic awareness activities in kindergarten classrooms, pre-K classrooms, even. We're seeing more explicit phonics instruction. So we're seeing those pieces. I can't necessarily say that I've seen any specific district do, long form, multiple year strategic science of reading integrations just yet. But, it starts with that phonemic awareness into phonics. So there's hope that, we get there. But I do agree with you on the, they may not be doing their own research and just relying on what companies are saying, who obviously have a byline that they're also trying to meet.
Oh, yes, yes.
And not just what they're saying, what they're gifting them, what they're providing for them. We know how the deal is. We won't go there either. We may have to do a part 2 with Miss Ambria King to say it. So I'm curious with that, like, what curricula then are classrooms using right now? Because as teachers, that's kind of how we're trained. Like, we're given this set of instructions and curriculum to use that we're supposed to follow. And then if you're great, you tweak it based on like what your students need and what your style is. So what kind of things are they using right now?
Well, I mean, I think it's definitely, it's such a weird transitionary period right now when it comes to reading instruction. So a lot of schools are still in that like cued based, inference based type thing, but they're also in this space where they're kind of phasing that out, kind of phasing in some phonemic awareness lessons. We're incorporating some phonics, but maybe we're not doing it fully sequentially. It's like a weird in-between type space. But then we also have some really great phonemic awareness things that are, building, that are coming in, the Hegartys or Orton Gilligan, those things that are very, very science of reading in nature. And, we then build from there. I think really the issue when it comes to like, what is science of reading? What is a science of reading curriculum? How do I get it? Is that in my experience and in my research, there is no one set curriculum that's just fully aligned start to finish. You're going to have to utilize phonemic awareness curriculum and a phonics curriculum and a fluency curriculum. And you need all of those to then be pieced together within themselves, so that if I have a student starting at kinder, they're going to really be very strong by the time we end third grade going into fourth grade.
Yeah, and it's so interesting you say that. Like, now we're in this weird kind of shifting moment. So imagine that your kid is coming into kindergarten in this weird shifting moment. We talked about this in last week's episode. They're almost like these little guinea pigs. We're trying out something new. We're not really sure how to fully implement it. So we're going to use a little bit of the old mixed with a little bit of the new. And so they're trialing this out on kids in real time. And I think that's a real problem, because families are looking to schools as the authority, the expert, the leader. You know what's best for my kids. And right now, some of these schools do not. They will never say that out loud.
Right.
But some of them do not know what is going on. And what you just mentioned about like patching together the phonemic awareness and, phonics-based learning, and even phonological awareness too, that encompasses what we know the research supports in order to get kids reading. But that's really hard for school districts to find this package of material that brings in all of that. And then they want to, how you like buy a piece of furniture.
Right.
The school districts want it like delivered, fully assembled.
Yeah.
And what we're saying with the science of reading is like, this is an IKEA box that you're going to have to pull out the instructions and put this together yourself. But schools are they're not adapt for that. And I don't know if it's because the pace that they want these teachers to teach the material, if it's the confidence that they have in their teachers from their teacher prep programs. I don't know where the disconnect is, but I can see schools being very hesitant to say, hey, teachers, pull in the things that based on science of reading research, help kids read.
Yeah, and I think what it is illuminating for a lot of people, but that for those of us who are in education already know, is that education does not fit in a kit. It cannot fit in this perfect little box that you want it to. And so as we're talking about, kids graduating high school and they can't read, or, percentages of fifth graders who aren't reading on grade level, as we're throwing out those statistics and people are actively trying to fix it, they're running into the fact that fixing reading is not really a fix, because the problem to fix is much bigger than just reading. But that's the one that we're getting stats on. That's the one that's in news articles and in the paper. And we can talk about that one because that's the one we're really talking about. But yeah, I won't get on my deep education soapbox today either. But yeah, I think it's just the fact that like, there is no one thing, and you want that because that's how you've built this, but really it's not going to work that way either.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy to me. Even in that podcast, they talked a lot about teacher prep programs and how there really is no real reading instruction embedded in that. And I think a lot of parents would be shocked to know that we have teachers graduating that have not been instructed on how to teach kids how to read. One teacher even said in that podcast, I learned how to spot a struggling reader, and I learned how to identify the kid who struggles with reading, but I never was taught how to actually teach a child how to read. And these are great teachers. They want to help kids. This is like one of the most thankless professions in the world. We talked about low pay. We talked about crowded classrooms. We talked about all the microaggressions, all of that stuff. And so it's not pointing the finger at teachers to say, shame on you, but the institution that is surrounding teachers and building them up to be in our classrooms is really, really lacking. Yeah. So in knowing that, what can families do at home? Because we talked a lot here about
Mhm.
it has to be a connection between home and school. It can't just be you do you and I'm going to do me and we hope for the best for the kid. There has to be that collaboration. What can families do at home to support their child's reading development that is in line with the science of reading?
Okay, so I wrote these down because I wanted to make sure I didn't miss like something that I feel like is really important for families to know. The first one, like above all else, give yourself grace because it can be so overwhelming, the amount of information that's just like being thrown at you and the amount of buzzwords that you're hearing. And you see this one activity on Facebook and you see this other activity on TikTok, and parents are saying, oh, I taught my kid how to read in 3 days because I did this, this, and this. Take a step back from the noise.
Mhm.
Give yourself grace. It's going to be okay. Because, your child is loved and cared for, and they will learn how to read. It will be okay. So that's my number one. The others I've kind of like categorized into 2 categories. And so the first category is building reading environments. So we hear all of the time, like, build a literacy rich environment in your home. We hear that all the time, right? But I would add to that, build a literacy and language rich environment in your home. So yes, read to your child. Yes, always. Vary the types of texts that you're reading and exposing them to, right? It doesn't all just have to be a storybook. We can look at a magazine article. We can look at a recipe that's environmental text, right? So vary what that looks like. Don't feel pigeonholed or like you're in a box that reading has to look like what reading is as you're reading together. It does not have to be, oh, we're going to sit here and we're going to read the story beginning to end. No, we may just get 2 sentences into this book and then we're just going to spend the time flipping through the pages and talking about the pictures. That's perfectly fine. That's wonderful. That's what falls into building rich environments when it comes to reading. I would also add to that, let your child see you read, because so much of the curriculums that are more, cued based are all about like inspiring a love of reading. But we know that children model the behaviors that they see. If you want them to love reading, then they've got to see you enjoying reading too. So let them see you read. And I know like that partially sounds hypocritical because I'm a major reader and I grew up in a family of readers, but you can't ask them to do something that you're yourself not doing, right? And that doesn't have to be, this massive 700-page novel. No, they can just see you reading a magazine. Like, it doesn't have to be something crazy. So those go in like that literacy rich piece. And the language rich piece, that's all going into those science of reading core things, the phonemic awareness, the phonological awareness. So just talk to your kid. Don't talk to your kid like they're a kid. Let them hear real words.
Preach.
Please say that again.
We don't have to talk to a baby in baby talk. They are fully capable of understanding real language, but also embrace your own home language. We may all speak English. We may all speak whatever our languages are, but we also have our own ways in which we talk inside our homes. So let your children also hear your home language and love it and appreciate it. Let them also hear the language that you would speak with other people. If you're out and unfortunately code switching professionally, let them also hear that. Have all of these conversations around them and with them. Because when we hear more words, we have the better ability to start listening to different sounds and beginning to understand what those sounds are. So that's like just basic things to do. But if you want more like technical things and skills to start building as a family, the first one I would say is play word games. So if you're in the car and you're like, oh, what do you see? I see a tree. Ooh, tree. What word rhymes with tree? Ooh, see. What other words rhyme, right? So word games like rhyming games or change the sound games. So maybe it's, if my word is bat, if I change t to d, what word is that now? Bad, right? So those types of word games, which are very easy to like look up and find, anything where we're changing sounds, manipulating sounds. I would also highly, highly suggest that when you start working on sounds and letter sounds, to not do them in ABC order. And, you know, we love songs that teach our kids sounds, you know, if it's from Gracie's Corner or whatever that we found. The problem is then you have a child that knows their sounds, but they only know them in that sequence. If I ask you to tell me what sound T makes, and then I turn around and ask you to tell me what S makes, can you tell me, right? I would also say that when you are introducing letter sounds, to make sure that you're not adding extra sounds to the sound that that letter makes. So, for example, if we're trying to teach the sound for T, it's T, not T, right? Or L, ooh, not L, because then essentially you're adding extra sounds that aren't really there. And that's really hard for adults who are proficient readers to like think about in regression, because you're like, oh no, I already know that sound. That's exactly what it sounds like. And then you know, I would also say I would challenge parents to sit down and look at a word and break down the individual sounds in that word and recognize that, oh, I'm having to use a lot of skills to read this word myself. And so I need to break, those skills need to be teeny tiny for them to start learning, right? For our kiddos to start learning. And then the last one on my like list of things is to, I'm not going to use the word avoid. Instead, I'm going to say pay attention to leveled readers at the bookstore. Because there are some leveled readers out there that are amazing, that are fully aligned to the science of reading, that I would 100% recommend for families. There are others that I would say, that's a great book to read together, but you shouldn't expect your kindergartner to be able to read that book themselves just because it says that it's on the kindergarten level. And the reason I say that is because what you want in a leveled reading book is words that have been written and curated because your child has learned the skill that is attached to that word. So, for example, if my child were basic reading, right, I am going to pick up this book that they're going to read. Maybe they're very interested in this Marvel character, whomever, whatever it may be. It says it's for kindergarten. We're going to sit down and read it. And then you're going to come across words that they haven't learned how to break down yet, right? Your child is still at cat, just general consonant, vowel, consonant words. And then you're going to get to a word that may say that. They haven't learned that TH makes its own sound that is separate from a T and an H. And then they're going to get frustrated because they can't read it. And then you're going to be like, oh, but it says you're supposed to be able to read it. You're in kindergarten. Why can't you read it? Right? So you want to look through that book yourself first. See what types of words are occurring. We want very simple sentences. We want words that repeat, and skills that aren't more advanced than where we are yet. And, you know, I'm not saying don't buy it. Sure, buy it. We love the characters. It's a great one to read together, but don't harp so much on it says you are in the first grade and you should be able to read this book. because sure, they should be able to read parts of that book by then, but the words may not fully align to what they've actually learned how to do.
Mhm. I love those. So good. All of it. Language rich,
So for real, so great.
literacy rich. I love
Like
that.
as you were reading the list, I was thinking about myself as a parent who has a current first grader. And that's like one of the major milestone grade levels for reading. And he's having some issues. And so, you know, the parent in me is like getting all anxious and concerned and everything about it. But like as you went through the list, I'm mentally checking off like, do I do that in the house? Okay, yeah. Do I do that? Like, no, but that sounds really easy to do. Like you were lessening my anxiety because the strategies you gave are so doable and so simple. Like there's nothing complicated about anything that you said. All it takes is intention.
Yes.
On the parents' part. And I love that.
And I think too, so many times, you know, we harp on, oh, you need to be able to read, and we harp on you need to be able to like count, right? But we also don't harp on like those are skills that they're learning for the very first time, and they take time.
Right.
And we can do very simple things to aid in that process. It doesn't have to be so big and grandiose, and we don't have to sit here and go, oh, should we homeschool next year because it's not working? You know, it can be very, very minimal to just strengthen those skills so that when they are in a classroom that may be a patchwork quilt trying to piece together things in this transition time, that they're coming in with just a little bit of an oomph, a boost underneath their belt, if you will.
Right. I love that so much. My heart is also in early intervention as well. That's like such fertile ground to plant good seeds. So parents, implement some of the things that Ambry has shared with you all tonight, and think about the questions that we posed to you in last week's episode about, hey, what is the method that my kids' school is using to teach them how to read? Ask those questions. Are they learning how to rhyme? Are they learning how to sound words out? Are they learning how to guess and look at pictures? Because there's a big difference between the two, and you're going to want to get your kid on the right track as fast as possible. Ambry, if any of our viewers want to reach out, connect with you, follow up, ask some questions, how can they do that?
Yeah, they're more than welcome to email me. I am very much so like not a super online person. I'm just, you know, very nerdy and a passionate educator always. But yeah, my email is just king.ambriain@gmail. So I'm always, always, always happy to curate resources, to answer questions, to say, you know, hey, look at this thing, you know, from there. Always happy to help any family who's trying to figure out what they want to do for their kiddos when it comes to their learning.
Awesome. Well, we will drop Ambria's email address in the comments. Please reach out, comment, share this episode with a friend. And thank you so much for joining us. It was a pleasure having you, Ambria.
Thank you so much for having me. This has been great.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.